The Sandy and Toddcast is a MindgardenMedia podcast in association with
Screw You, Todd
Productions. Another week, another Sandy and Toddcast. And it's more about our trip to Door County. What is that? Is that last year now or is that 2 years ago?
June of last year. So almost a year ago now.
Seems like longer, doesn't it?
I know. It's because we only get to see each other like once a year. This year it's Cleveland. How do we go from Door County to Cleveland? But, it'll work.
We'll make it work. At any rate, more history is no mystery. It's Season 8, Episode 3, and it's Part 3 on the Sandy and Toddcast, and it's on the way next.
Hey gang, we are Damon,
Sue, and Amy Lynn
from the Adelaide Park Paranormal Society.
Join us for each episode of the Alchemy Podcast as we take a deep dive into the world of the paranormal, cryptids, the occult, and more. We've seen, heard, and experienced almost everything, and now we're bringing it all to you.
Find us on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, and anywhere you might find your podcasts. Apps Alchemy Podcast is a MindgardenMedia production.
Broadcasting from two very different yet magical places not found on any map. Get ready to discuss the strange, weird, ghostly, crazy, spooky, and odd things that take place around us each and every day. All while having a little bit of fun. This is the Sandy and Toddcast.
Welcome again to the Sandy and Toddcast. She is Sandy.
He is Todd. Howdy, howdy.
And it's more History is No Mystery, Episode 3 for Season 8.
Usually you come up with those cute names. I love this name. That was my idea.
It was her idea. So this is what we'll do. Little golf clap in the background.
That's right. So, last week we kind of talked about Door County and Washington Island as a whole. And this week we're going to dig in a little bit more and talk about how history sort of led to some of the unusual experiences we had on the island. Now, safe to say, we didn't stay on the island that long. I don't think it was something that we probably would have wanted to be there all day.
Yeah.
So I think the time was good. Probably no more than a couple hours, I think we were there. But we stopped at a few different places. One of those places was Nelsen's Hall, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. And we also stopped at a place called the Stavkirke. And I'm sure not many people have ever heard that word because I hadn't heard that word. And we were just talking before we started recording today about how to actually pronounce it correctly. And we think our general consensus is that's how you pronounce it. One of the things that calls attention to the particulars of places in our travels is the beauty of and poetry of the buildings on the landscape. Buildings speak of history and heritage, the immigrant influence, and we're all immigrants. We're all people with a history. And so when we went to the Stavkirke, which I didn't even know existed. I must have missed that part on Haunted State because I didn't remember it at all.
Well, what we did was we went there kind of on a fun day.
Okay.
So we didn't go to actually investigate. We just went to check it out.
And it's so cool. So let's start with where it is and the kind of the whole idea of the Stavkirke. Door County is really blessed with a history of a lot of different cultures, but especially Scandinavian. And you see it everywhere. In Sister Bay, where we stayed during our long weekend in Door County, there's Al Johnson's Swedish restaurant.
Oh, yeah.
And that's actually a great example because it's sort of like the centerpiece of the town. It's right smack dab in the middle of town, and it really defines the whole village. And everything is sort of set up around the restaurant, which is neat. And I mean, it really is a true Scandinavian influence, and it's always busy. Like, it's a huge lawn. People are there all the time listening to music. But Washington Island has something that, like I said, I've never seen before or heard of. It's called the Stavkirke, and it's literally translates into Church of Stavs. And it's based on drawings of one that's built in Borgen, Norway in 1150 AD. So it's actually a replica. It's not an original one. And it doesn't really matter, though, because we've all experienced where I've actually experienced activity on replicas of places. I mean, energy is energy, and it doesn't really matter if it's the actual building or a replica of a building a lot of times.
It was built in honor of that and in honor of the religion and the background of the people. So that, and I think, played a very important role in what we got when we went there.
The love and the feelings and the honor and the memorial of something like that. You know, the collective mindset has a huge influence on the energies that are attracted to an area. And you also have to look at the land itself. And we didn't really discuss this last week, but it's really important to remember the layers of energies over the years on this island that have built up. You've got Native American energy, you've got Scandinavian energy, you've got more modern, you've got hundreds of years of history leveled one on top of the other. So it's not even just a building, it's the land that the building is on. And a really quick history of this particular building. It was really a community effort. Like I said, it was begun in 1992 by skilled local craftsmen and a half dozen volunteers. They'd come together in the summers and actually work on it. And even occasionally in the winters, once they made the base, they actually put a tent over it and would work on it during the winters occasionally, too. The original project is attributed to the Reverend James Rife. He was a pastor on the island in the early 1980s, and he felt such a structure would reflect the immigrant influence on the island. Sister Bay architect Pat Mangan offered a personal interest of Stav history to the project, made the drawings based on the Borgen Stavkirke and the list of necessary materials. There were different skilled craftsmen and women from Door County who came together to carve the pieces, hand-carved the pieces. And the project was completed and dedicated in the summer of 1995. So it's been quite a while since it was actually dedicated. And then by 1999, it was all in place. The bell, everything was in place. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's become a huge thing. 5,000 or more people visit it annually. They have church services there in the summer, baptisms, weddings are held there. The Trinity Lutheran Church, so we looked across the road. There's a big old church across the road. They are the owner and manager of the property. So, you know, it's just this huge community thing. So what exactly is a Stavkirke? A Stav church is a medieval or Viking age wooden Christian church building, and the name derives from the building structure and construction. So these churches were once common in Northern Europe. So in the Scandinavian countries, in Norway alone, it was thought that about 1,000 of them were built.
Wow.
Recent research, I know, has increased this estimate, is now believed 2,000 were built alone. They were gradually replaced, especially in Norway. Many survived until the 19th century when a substantial number were destroyed. Today, there are only 28 historical Stav churches remaining in Norway. Stav churches were particularly common in less populated areas like high valleys and forest land, and in fishermen's villages on islands and minor villages along fords. There are all kinds of construction. So there's like the single nave, which is basically just one central room for the whole congregation. And a nave is the raised part of the roof. So it's sort of like a pointed roof. It can also have a raised roof, which is taller. Some have several naves branching out from the main room. There's usually a walkway up at the top. We saw that in this one, circling the center. Many have walkways with a roof outside of them, which helps protect them in the winter. So a lot of thought, even though these churches were so incredibly old, like hundreds upon hundreds of years old, the thought process and the intelligence that went into these pieces of architecture are just brilliant and fascinating, that they were able to adapt them to withstand winters. You know, I mean, we're talking about the Scandinavian countries. The winters were brutal. And they gradually replaced them, unfortunately. And that's why this one is so important to the memory and the history of the Scandinavian immigrant population, because it is an exact replica. And I will say this, Todd, it is gorgeous. It's just absolutely beautiful. And I didn't even know we were going to stop here. And we stopped here and I got out and I saw it. I was like, oh my gosh. And it does have quite a bit of energy.
It does, doesn't it?
We actually sat down. I don't think I was expecting it. And of course, we brought some equipment with us, and it was very impromptu. I thought we were just going to get out and, check it out and look at it. And we got inside, and you and I both kind of felt like we needed to do something about it. And we turned on I think it was it the K2 meter? I think we turned on the millimeter and the K2 and the digital recorder. And I started talking I could feel. So the inner walkway up at the top of the wall around the church, I just kept feeling like something was moving back and forth, like just going along the route of the walkway over and over again. And it would stop, turn around, go back, stop, turn around and go back. I have no idea what that was to this day. And I sort of started to we were asking a lot of questions. And for some reason, so it was 3 guys and me, for some reason, this energy, the spirit energy, felt more like they wanted to, kind of interact with me because I was a woman. And so got a few intelligent responses. And, it was a really cool session. What were your thoughts on that session?
Well, you mentioned the movement, and ironically, we were getting knocks and bangs from up in that area.
Yeah.
And I'm going to call it the church, but that's, that was one of the things that happened. And then we were getting responses on the meters and additional bangs by doors.
Yeah.
Remember the side doors that they were locked shut, but there were doors on the side, on both sides, that you could walk around the church. Yep. And we kept getting knocks and bangs from those as well. And it wasn't a particularly windy day where you might have like shifting or anything like that. That's the first thing you think of is how windy is it outside, but this is sturdy. Yeah, and that you would expect to hear maybe some creaks or groans.
Yeah.
This was more like bang. This is more like a bang or a knock that we were hearing.
This was definitely somebody intelligent trying to communicate with us. We didn't get too many answers. We just got more sort of like, yes, we know you're here, sort of that being able to acknowledge the person. It was kind of difficult because we were in a public place. And so, at the last minute, somebody pulls into the parking lot. We're like, what are the chances? Here it's like 5:00 at night and somebody pulls into the parking lot. So we kind of had to scurry, but it was so interesting. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it doesn't necessarily, the whole building basically to me was a trigger object.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I thought it was great. And I was thankful to you that you took us there because I would have never even known it existed. And it was such a cool experience. I like the knocks. I think the knocks, I can pick up the energy moving back and forth at the top. But the fact that the knocks came with it when we asked, pretty interesting. And I would assume that those doors on the side were entrance and exit. So there would have been a lot of activity through those doors
Right.
as well back, So just a really cool place. I thought that was neat. And I love that we can look back on, and this is something I do a lot. And because I'm not used to researching a lot of stuff beforehand when it comes, if I know that it's going to be a paranormal type experience, I don't usually do a lot of research ahead of time because I like to just go with my gut. I didn't even know that this was going to be anything paranormal. I thought we were just looking at the beautiful flowers.
And in fact, didn't we have to run back and get our equipment out of the car because, right?
Did.
We didn't even take it with us.
No, we literally ran back and got stuff. We're like, okay, grab this and let's see, because things were going on almost immediately.
Yeah.
And it was certain things that we talk about. Like we talked about the painting that was in the front, and was it Christian and was it pagan and this and, and every time we discussed something different, something new would happen.
Mm-hmm.
Like a knock would happen, or, we detect some movement or something would happen. The equipment would go off. And I don't know about you, but to me that says intelligent energy. And like I said, it's a whole trigger object. And just going back after the fact and finding out a little bit about them helped me really put two and two together. And that's why the history of a place is so incredibly important. It just, I think it just, our visit there, Todd, and tell me if you agree, our visit there to me just helped acknowledge the presence of someone who felt strongly enough about that particular place to communicate with us, of which I'm very grateful for, and almost thank us for the acknowledgement.
Yeah, and I also feel like it was such a complete surprise to find anything there that it was a paranormal gift for us. And I think that so many things that we did on that trip, so many things that happened were aha moments. Sometimes you go into an investigation and you have one. Sometimes you go into an investigation, you have none. And this whole weekend was like, wow, think about that. And wow, think about that. Turning the corner to going to Washington Island, we talked about it in the last episode, and the change in the atmosphere. I mean, those were all aha moments to me, not because it happened, but because you weren't necessarily expecting it to happen. And all of a sudden, it kind of gave you a better idea of what might be going on in some of those areas.
Exactly. And I can't stress enough how much the history of a place really affects who or what you're going to find in that specific spot. And it's just, I love the aha moments. We talk about kindred spirits all the time. I've had a lot of aha moments just watching that show, especially in the past season.
Yeah.
Where you and I will both say, okay, we're watching Kindred Spirits right now. And then you'll say, what did you think about this? And I'll be like, wow, I never really thought about investigating and asking that question or approaching it in that way. I'm going to try that next time.
Right.
And it's just so fascinating to have those aha moments and be able to link them with the things that happened in that spot previously. It just gives you that really well-rounded understanding of what goes on in a particular place, a particular location. And whether it's before, during, or after, it all kind of ties in together.
And sometimes it takes you back to previous investigations and you go, well, maybe that's what was going on,
Oh, yeah. That's happened to me a lot. I have done a lot of investigations, official investigations, and I've done a lot of, same as you, and I've done a lot of those sort of, let's take a ride here and let's go to this place and see if anybody wants to talk to us. I have my equipment. I bring my equipment pretty much with me everywhere I go these days because you never know. And it's sort of just each investigation teaches me something. A few weeks ago we filmed episode 2 of Empire Spirits at the Salisville Hotel. And I actually decided to do the spirit box experiment that we see all the time on Kindred Spirits, where you put the headphones on, the blindfold on, you let the spirit box go, and everybody else asks questions. Now, it's hard for me to do it because I am always getting feelings and pictures and words in my head when I'm on an investigation. So to me, it's almost counterproductive for me to go under the headphones. I'd rather it be somebody who doesn't have that interference.
Right.
Because then we know that it's true. It's really true responses that are coming from the spirit box. So we put my fellow cast member, Michelle, underneath the headphones. She had never done anything like it before in her life. And it was phenomenal. Like, I have never seen a spirit box session personally that was as good as that one. And I think that I have to say it was because of watching the show. It was because of my previous experience with other spirit box sessions, learning what are good questions to ask, what are not good questions to ask. So even just that little history leads to aha moments. And it doesn't have to be history in time. It can be just your personal history of experiences before that helps you advance to the next stage or the next investigation and look at things differently. So it's really important. And like you said, we had aha moments like the entire weekend that we were up in Door County. So our next stop, after we left the church, the Stavkirke, we actually went to Nelsen's Hall, which is super old. It's the oldest continuously operating tavern in Wisconsin. And you guys did an actual investigation there. And I just wanted to be a part of the Bitters Club. Let's talk about the Bitters Club. Because we all did it. Dave didn't do it, though. And you had already did you do it? I don't think you did it because you were already a member.
I skipped it.
I know. They kind of threw me to the wolves, I guess. And so I was just excited because what happens is you have to take a shot, and I'll explain the backstory in a second, but you have to take a shot of bitters. And then if you do it, you get a card with your thumbprint, your bitters thumbprint on it, and you are a member of the Bitters Club. So Nelsen's history is really interesting. Nelsen's today is the largest purveyor of Angostura bitters in the world. They sell more than 10,000 shots of these bitters every year. The tavern's history is probably even more interesting than that. Nelsen's Hall opened in 1899 as a dance hall and a tavern. Now, back in those days, in the 20s, the Roaring 20s, lots of taverns operated as speakeasies throughout Prohibition. But Nelsen's was different. Owner Tom Nelsen, in order to sell alcoholic beverages with the consent of the county court, found a really unique loophole, and that is what legends are born of. When the Volstead Act was passed on October 28th in 1919, Nelsen wasn't going to give up his business because as a dance hall and a tavern, you can't sell alcohol. Right. What are you going to do?
There ain't nothing going on. And when you're the only one on the island, that was a hopping place.
Exactly. So he had heard that alcohol could be purchased and dispensed for medicinal reasons. He wasn't a doctor and he didn't have access to the normal types of medicinal alcohol. So instead, he applied for a pharmacist's license and he got it. He remembered that bitters contained alcohol and were sold at the local drugstore in Sturgeon Bay, mainly to treat stomach disorders. So he started prescribing as a pharmacist and selling Angostura bitters to his patrons. Now, bitters were never meant to be drunk on their own, at least not as an alcoholic beverage, but they had a high alcohol content, about 90 proof. So he prescribed his bitters and he saved his business. Long story short, a federal agent stopped by Nelsen's one day, saw everyone in the place drunk, and had papers drawn to serve Mr. Nelsen with violating the Volstead Act. Nelsen went to court. He gave numerous reasons as to why he should be allowed to consider to be serving it, and he actually won. So he was allowed to continue serving his bitters even through Prohibition. Now, today, Nelsen's has the Bitters Club, and that's what I wanted to become a card-carrying member of. And so you guys, threw me to the wolves. I did take a shot of the bitters. I did get my card. It wasn't nearly as bad as I was afraid it was going to be. I did chase it with a nice rum and Diet Coke, and I was inducted. So now I have that claim to fame as well. I am part of the Bitters Club. And it's a tradition on the island, and so many people go and do it. All you have to do is look at them weird, and they know what you want to ask and what you're going to do, and they set you up and get you ready.
And people who live on the island, they still when you go to a tavern, right? You drink and drink, and then somebody go, let's do a round of shots. And then people will say, well, let's do a round of Rumpelmints, or let's do a round of schnapps or whatever.
Right.
In that location, people actually still do shots of bitters.
Sure, why not? I mean, it really isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. But I will say I was a little bit tipsy by the time I left.
Jesus
because between that shot... Oh, we all were, though.
You wouldn't too.
You guys were drinking beer.
Very well in Wisconsin. Let me tell you, that's an afternoon. That's an afternoon.
I don't drink that often anymore. But you guys were drinking beers. You were a little tipsy too, and so it was just a really fun time. And here's one other really cool thing about Nelsen's is that patrons will try to tack a dollar bill onto the ceiling when they come in. And each year, the bar staff takes the bills down and they donate the proceeds to local charities. So that's a super cool thing. That's one thing we didn't do. I think by the time we were drinking, that was off the table anyways because we didn't remember it. But it is a really, really neat place, okay? It's just sort of this hole in the wall. And the bar is gorgeous. It's a very old bar, absolutely gorgeous. And we had so much fun in there, and there was some residual energy in there. Now, here's the idea. Here's some of the spirits at Nelsen's, so to speak. It is believed that Tom Nelsen's spirit is still at the tavern, and apparently he liked the ladies as well.
Mm-hmm.
He drank 16 shots of bitters a day, and he lived until he was 90. And they say that doors shut all the time. There's footsteps. I can tell you that it literally is filled with residual energy. That's without a doubt. I didn't come across good old Tom Nelsen, but I know you guys investigated. What did you guys find in there?
Well, actually, the first night we were there, we couldn't investigate like we wanted to because the agreement was they were going to close the doors on the place. Mm-hmm. And we could start like around 10 o'clock. Well, there were people drinking and nobody wanted to leave. So we actually ended up starting our investigation back in the kitchen where it was relatively quiet. Mm-hmm. And there was a couple of aha moments that night. Number one, we had a spirit box going and some flashlights. And we got the name Tom that came through the spirit, but what's your name? The name Tom came through.
I love it.
With the flashlight, I know there's a lot of people that question that, but with the flashlight, we did the whole, if your name starts with a B, light it up. If your name starts with an S, light it up. If your name starts with a T, light it up. Bam. So Tom came through apparently on that.
That's great.
And then that was the time where I had my first disembodied voice. And you can call it a voice or you can call it a growl, but twice right in front of me and two other members of the group, right in front of us, there was a very low growl that came through right out of thin air.
I love it. And I do remember that one because wasn't that episode 1 of Haunted State when you guys did Nelsen's? Because I remember that one because I remember that you were a little bit freaked out by that. And that, now, am I correct that Tom would actually sleep? There was a couch that he would actually sleep on?
There apparently was like a I won't call it necessarily a fainting couch, but it was one of those couches I think that was, with one arm on it or whatever.
Yeah,
and I think it was
like
located
turn of the century.
Yep, and I think it was located near the women's bathroom.
Yeah. And
so he would sleep there or whatever, and he liked to pinch the women as they walked by or whatever.
I love that. I love it. And it's so cool. I mean, let's briefly talk about flashlights because I'm not necessarily a non-believer in the flashlight idea. I think that especially if it is used as a tool with another piece of equipment and they're both able to validate what's going on, I don't see anything wrong with that. I don't understand why people are so against the flashlight.
Well, here's
idea.
the thing. Every piece of equipment you use, we are just not at a place right now in investigating where we can say 100% when this happens, it means this. We can't do that. We're not there yet. So every piece of equipment that you use has positive things that can result from it, and there's negative things that can result from it, meaning sometimes you get false readings. Sometimes you get a static interference on a spirit box. Sometimes the K2 picks up electrical magnetic fields. It just doesn't make sense. So there's all that kind of stuff. And flashlights are kind of it's kind of the dumbest version of equipment that we use for investigations. Right. The other stuff, the Mel meters and all this stuff, and now you've got the SLS cameras. That's all evolved, and here's this flashlight laying there. But I'll tell you what, when you're asking questions and you're actually getting results from it, and in the video, which is something I don't believe we actually revealed because we caught it after the episode came out. Mm-hmm. But right before the flashlight turns on, there is a shadow that goes across the floor and up over into the corner of that room.
I love it.
Which we didn't see as we were doing the other work. But when you sit and watch it on TV, you can certainly see that shadow movement.
Yeah.
And so again, with that and some of the other stuff we caught in that room, it's hard to just throw it away and say, it's just a flashlight.
Two points there. Number one, that's why it's so incredibly important to remain somewhat skeptical. I mean, I am not a skeptic per se, but I am not 100% believer. Before I say something is, and Dave and I just had this conversation, before I say something is 100% paranormal, I have to discount everything else. So that's why it's so important to know everything that you can about each individual piece of equipment and what affects it and what doesn't. I will take pieces of equipment, turn them on, and put them next to each other to see what happens when I'm not in a situation. Or I will put them next to my phone to see what happens. I put my phone on airplane mode.
Yep.
When I'm in an investigation, but I'll still do that just to make sure. If I'm sitting in the car because it's 20 degrees out in the middle of winter, I will actually get out for a moment and see if I'm still getting the same readings as I did when I was in the car, because I don't want the car to interfere, with it. I mean, I do all kinds of things to try and make sure. But the other point about that is that it's always a good idea to, if you can, use equipment in tandem. Understanding how they work together or how far apart they should be from each other is incredibly helpful to you. I mean, I'll go put a piece of equipment up to the wall and see where it works and where it doesn't, so that I have, they call it baseline, so I can see what I'm doing. But it's incredibly helpful to have two different pieces of equipment. I don't care if it's a Mel meter and a K2. I don't care if it's a digital recorder and a K2. I don't care what it is, but at least two pieces of equipment together, one will usually validate the other. And if not, then you use your best judgment as to what it is. I mean, there's not much you can do to not validate an EVP when you're aware of the conditions. I was just reviewing evidence. I don't want to give too much away, but I was just reviewing the evidence for the filming we did at the Hotel Salisville a few weeks ago, and we were upstairs in the ballroom, and I asked at one point, is there something that I can do to help you? And I received, I don't know. Very intelligent response. And I know because of I was in that situation that there was no one speaking at that time, no one living speaking at that time. And so it's hard to discount an EVP, especially if you know the conditions. But having the Mel meter or the K2 there as well going off at that point of time, and we did have video so I could see, really validates it. So I think flashlights can be great tools if used correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got random people trying to use flashlights who don't know really how it should work in that kind of a situation, in that experiment. So that may lead to maybe not the most validating type of experience, but I think they can be great in certain situations.
But you can say that about any piece of equipment,
Sure.
right? Like just because you get a blip on a K2 doesn't mean it's a response. It could be something else.
Exactly.
You got to look at how did it respond? When did it respond? Did you check the area around? Did you get that baseline? Did you do all this stuff? Do you got a phone in your pocket? All that kind of stuff.
And that's why it's so important to say, okay, if my phone is right next to this K2, here's what I get. If I move it 2 feet away, do I get the same thing? If I move it 4 feet away, do I get the same thing? If it's in my pocket. And a lot of times this stuff is all going on in your head at the same time as you're experiencing it. You're automatically trying to discern, should I move here? Should I put this here?
Right.
Let me see. Is this piece of equipment that she has getting the same thing I'm getting because they're, close enough to each other where they should? All this stuff is going on at the same time. I'll tell you, investigations without having these abilities, just investigations themselves, are extremely draining and tiring because you're constantly thinking. You're debunking as you're going a lot of times because what that'll do is that will sort of dictate what your next move is. It's like a game of chess. Like, is this legitimate? If this is legitimate, then I'm going to move over here and I'm going to do this, or I'm going to continue this type of questioning because I'm getting somewhere. So there's a lot that goes on in an investigation, and your equipment is so important. And so let's talk real quick before we wrap it up for the week. Let's talk really quick about when we were sitting outside of Nelsen's. We excused ourselves real quickly and we said this would be a great place to record an episode of the show together. We did a couple episodes while we were up in Door County, and you guys can go back and find them. I will put in the show notes what season and episodes they were because I don't know offhand. But so we literally put our phone down in front of us and we recorded. And as we're sitting out on the little porch, we were by ourselves, and across the road there was like a field. So it was kind of, the tree line was set back in. So there was a tree line on the left, a tree line straight ahead of us, and then a tree line on the right, like a U shape. And as we're sitting there, we're both kind of drawn out to that field, and we could both feel that energy.
I was literally, here's what it was for me. I was sitting there, and when you are in public and you're sitting someplace and you just know that somebody is looking at you, somebody is staring at you, or you're in a location and you're investigating and you feel the presence of something there. Yep. I felt the feeling of being watched.
Yes.
And while I didn't see it with my naked eye, in my mind or my third eye or whatever the hell that was, I saw it. And then you said, it's almost as though there's Native American. And I'm like, because it freaks you out that somebody else is actually feeling and quote unquote seeing the same thing.
That was more freaky to me than the fact that I was actually seeing them.
Right. Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I'm like, and I kept glancing up as we're talking, and I'm like looking over there like, I keep seeing these people at the tree line, and I'm like, they're Native Americans. Why are there Native Americans at the tree line? Not that I believe that they were standing there in real life right then, but I'm like, I can understand why I see the Native Americans, but why are they standing there? And they were literally watching us. And just at that point where like my light bulb went on, you said that. And I was like, oh my God, I am so freaked out right now because we're both noticing it. And that's the energy that's on this island. And at the time, I didn't know a lot of the history of this island. I just thought we were going to go have a fun time and, check out an island. And I was excited about the ferry ride over. And I was just like, and then all of a sudden, as we get around that island, boom, it hit me. The energy shift hit me, and the rest is history, literally and figuratively.
I remember when we went to investigate, we stayed at a Airbnb that was right on the water. Mm. And I went out because there were these really nice Adirondack chairs right out near the water. Like the water was maybe, I don't know, I'm not good with distance, but not that far away. And you could hear the water and you could hear in the wind and the grasses and all that kind of stuff. And as I'm sitting out there, two things came to mind. I don't feel alone. And I could find myself, while it's beautiful and it was wonderful, I could find myself being very depressed on this island. The energy can definitely make you feel down.
I am so happy that you said that because I kind of forgot about that. To me, to your point, I think we actually discussed this. We may have even discussed this on the episode. It's like a low hum.
Yeah.
There's like a low hum through the whole island. And it's like, I don't know if it's from the harshness of living where they've lived for all these hundreds of years. And I'm not just talking the local residents now. I'm talking about over the centuries. I don't know if it's the harshness. I don't know if it's the battles and there were a lot of skirmishes and things that went on. I don't know for sure what it could be, but it's like a low hum and it's almost a depression. Like the people there, and I'm not saying the people who live there now aren't happy, but the whole island itself has that hum.
Yeah.
Of like a depression of something, and nobody can see me doing this, but sort of a pushing down.
Yeah, it's like a pressure.
This.
Yeah,
through the whole island. And again, aha moment. I never felt that before. I've never.
But it is almost
that energy.
But it almost is that energy that we felt driving up by Ed Gein's grave. I mean, it was still that. It was still that something was hovering over you.
Yes.
On your back, on your shoulders, on your head kind of thing.
You know, that imprint on the land, whether it's in Plainfield, Wisconsin, it's in, on Washington Island, it's in Las Vegas, it's in, New Orleans, it doesn't matter where it is, that centuries old stamping of energy on land is what really makes a location. Yes, there are individual buildings and locations that may have an intelligent spirit, but that residual heaviness is everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just because there's centuries upon centuries of experience and life and loss,
death,
and death,
hate,
and
love, and
everything is all the ground, the earth absorbs all of that energy. And again, when you have limestone or there are a lot of different, New York State has a lot of quartz-based rock beds in it. When you have that, as well as limestone, when you have that, it just soaks it up.
I didn't mean to almost laugh at you, but I almost did because you were kind of going, and all I could think of was Jimmy Stewart. Yeah.
Thanks. At least it's not bejesus.
But Jesus is dead.
But Jesus is gone. But yeah, so overall, just an amazing trip to Washington Island. I had a great time, but it wasn't the time I expected to have. It was just great in a different way, I guess. And the farther away from that time that we spent there we get, the more I can appreciate it because I am, I think, more attuned to energies after spending time there. Yeah.
Agree.
So that was day 1 in Door County last summer. We still have day 2 to talk about.
God.
I know. And then we've got some other stuff coming up this season. But next week, we're going to talk about the Kennet Island Lighthouse and that life-changing experience that you and I both shared. And maybe we'll stop at the Door County Winery.
All right. Can we
talk a little bit about that? Can we
just actually do that? Because that would be fun.
Let's do it.
All right. Let's do our spiel right now.
You can find the Sandy and Toddcast on any of the platforms that you normally find your podcasts, including YouTube and Twitter. Be sure to like the Sandy and Toddcast on Facebook to keep up on the latest goings-on, including each week's episode. You can also join our group, Stay Weirdos Friends of the Sandy and Toddcast, for more fun. Stay Weirdos is a safe place to share your thoughts, feelings, ideas, and random inappropriate memes without judgment. Sandy and Todd also have a podcast called the Empathecary Podcast. It's for empaths, by empaths. And if you know an empath, you might want to listen too. Find and like the page on Facebook. And finally, if you're thinking about starting your own podcast and just aren't sure where to start, Sandy and Todd can also help with that too. MindgardenMedia is their latest project where the dynamic duo can guide you every step of the way in your podcasting journey. Editing, producing and consulting is what they do. Like MindgardenMedia on Facebook or email them at themindgardenmedia@gmail.com. And as always, thanks for staying weird.
Well, it's another nice little episode of the podcast, and we'll continue on with History is No Mystery this season on the Sandy and Toddcast. So thanks for listening, and until next time, bye.
Bye.